We will start the press conference shortly. Afterwards, we will open it up for questions and answers. And of course, we're available throughout the day for any further questions you might have. We'll kick things off with Thomas Reynard, Managing Director for A4E.
Good morning to you all. Yes, we're lined up again, just like last year, so I'm very happy to be here again as A4E's Managing Director. For the sake of time, I'll start right away with the first slide. Yeah, which is actually behind me. Excellent. So, in a nutshell, again, Airlines for Europe, we have reached the threshold of 70% of representation of European passengers. So, we are the largest, by far the largest European Airlines Association in Brussels. You see the numbers there in front of you. And with that, I'll go to my second slide, which basically means, in a nutshell, that A4E is calling on the next EU leaders to elevate aviation policy to a critical priority for the next 5 years. As you know, we will have a new European Commission and a new European Parliament coming in later this year. Topping on our list is, of course, airspace reform, the revision of the Airport Charger Directive, the revision of EU 261 on passenger compensation, and the implementation of CORSIA. Apart from the fact that the European Commission is not ambitious enough in terms of ANSP's performance targets, what we in our business call RP3, the European Commission proposal is indirectly rewarding poor performing monopolies. So this is happening right now as we're having the situation today in terms of ANSP performance. So here we are at the end of another Commission mandate, and we still do not have the single European sky going forward. So with this is my introductory slide, and I leave it up to my CEO colleagues now to take it over from here, following with Willie Walsh.
Okay, thank you, Thomas, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, one of the key areas that A4E is focused on is the ATC performance. And 2018 was one of the worst years ever experienced by the industry. And clearly this is completely unacceptable for us as airlines, but more importantly, for us as the representatives of our customers. This situation is disgraceful and needs to be addressed. You can see on the chart there, we've had a disproportionate and unacceptable increase in the level of air traffic control delays that have been experienced. The chart shows you that flights have increased by 14% since 2013, but the ATC delays have increased by 279%. We've just spent an hour with Eamon Brennan, the Director General of Eurocontrol, discussing the performance of ATC providers across Europe and what actions can be taken to address this. According to their data, passengers in Europe experienced 19 million minutes of delays in 2018, 35 years of delays. That's more than double what we experienced in 2017. And this situation must be addressed. If we look at the next chart, you can see the impact that this is having. 334 million European customers experienced delays in excess of 15 minutes or cancellations during 2018. And these airspace inefficiencies have cost the EU economy an estimated 17.6 billion euros last year alone. And that's more than 30% up on 2017. And you can see also that the inefficiency that we experienced and have experienced for the last few years has significantly increased the amount of fuel being burnt and wasted as a result of this. 81,000 tons of fuel unnecessarily burnt, generating 254,000 tons of CO2 every year since 2015. And this trend clearly cannot continue. The performance is particularly poor in a couple of key areas. We have to call out Karlsruhe as one of the bottlenecks in Europe, and this is down to poor, inefficient, quite honestly disgraceful management of the ATC system in Germany. DFS should be ashamed of themselves. You know, what we've experienced in Germany is completely unacceptable. And this is not something that can't be fixed. It can be fixed with the right focus, with the right management action, and we as an industry are calling out DFS and the way they have managed this situation, and we are going to continue to highlight the poor performance of ATC providers around Europe when we witness it. Michael.
Thanks, Willie. And ladies and gentlemen, the bad news is it's getting worse. 2018 was the worst year on record for ATC performance across Europe. In January of 2019, it got worse yet again. Now, January is not a busy month for flights across Europe, and yet 90% of all delays in the month of January, and it looks like extending into February as well, were accounted for by air traffic control delays, primarily short staffing in Karlsruhe and in Marseille in the south of France. The purpose of A4E, though, is not just to complain about the services, it's to come up with practical solutions that we expect the EU authorities to implement. And we're continuing to call for action, urgent action, because as it gets worse, and it will be particularly bad here in April, May, June this summer, we need to keep focusing on how we can improve the situation. So, what are the solutions A4E have put forward? We need to minimise the impact from local strikes. In that respect, we want the EU to separate the overflights, the upper airspace, from the lower airspace, so that overflights are not compromised when, for example, the French air traffic controllers go on strike. French local labour law protects about 70% of the French flights. It's the overflights between Ireland and Italy, between the UK and Spain, between Portugal and Poland that get cancelled. They had nothing to do with the French ATC strike. So we need to separate the upper airspace. We have to make air traffic control providers more efficient. We need to shorten the time. It takes 3 years to train an air traffic controller. We can train pilots to become captains in a faster time than they can train air traffic controllers. In many respects, they're operating on different computer systems. They should be operating on the same computer system. The training period should be shortened to 6 months because we need an urgent delivery on this issue. We're calling for more measures to manage the network centrally. In the US, air traffic control is managed through a central command. We believe Eurocontrol should have similar power here, so that where you have an ATCO or an ATM provider, as in Germany, not providing the service that they have contracted to provide, they can move some of that capacity in some of those flights to other across to other countries. So you reward the countries that are efficient and that can produce, and you penalise the countries, most notably Germany and France at the moment, where we're having delivery problems. We need to implement cross-border airspace, so that instead of on a Dublin to Athens flight, we have to zigzag across 24 different national ATC spaces. We can fly much more direct, much more efficiently, saving time for our customers and also reducing the amount of fuel and CO2 emissions that flight will operate. We, above all, must introduce competition between ANSPs. Competition between the airlines in the last 30 years has transformed air travel around Europe. Fares have come down, services have increased, the quality of services has improved immeasurably, and yet we haven't rolled out that liberalisation to the ANSP providers. That's the way forward. Let's introduce more competition so that if Ryanair wants to contract with the Germans, we can do so directly and let them provide the ATC services if they can do it more efficiently than others. The last 2 points: we need to establish independent economic regulation for the ANSPs, so that, for example, where the DFS are lamentably failing to provide services in Karlsruhe, they are penalised, their income is reduced. And lastly, and above all, we must now urgently allow the airlines to recover our EU 261 expenses from the ATM providers. We have this ridiculous situation where, fine, we all support passenger rights, we pay hundreds of millions of euros a year in terms of right to care costs, compensation for delays and flight cancellations, when 90% of these delays are being caused by ANSP providers. Yet when we go to recover our costs in France or in Germany, the ANSPs have an immunity from prosecution. So we're left picking up the tab for our customers, and yet the people who are daily causing these delays have an immunity for prosecution. The next Commission, the next Parliament must redraft the EU 261 provisions so that we can claim that compensation back from the ATM providers, because it's only by financially penalising those service providers will we force them or encourage them to become more efficient and to deliver the services that we're paying for. Carsten. No, sorry, Johan.
Now, it's interesting, and I think it's important to understand also that the inefficiency that exists within the airspace and the management of that doesn't only affect, you know, companies and people, it does also affect the planet in terms of sustainability. And actually, at our steering board this morning, A4E Airlines agreed to take the lead in the development of sustainable targets together with the wider EU aviation industry. And this roadmap will be focused on limiting carbon emissions as a better means to support EU goals. And we believe that the EU and the European aviation can and should lead the way in driving further improvements in carbon efficiency. Now, the airlines in the EU are already doing a lot of things. A new study found that the EU airlines have saved some 20 million tons of CO2 emissions in the last 5 years. And that's equivalent of the emissions from 1.6 million intra-EEA flights, or 100 days worth of flying. We continue to invest in research and development innovations such as electric planes, hybrid engines and sustainable fuels alongside the current next generation of aircraft. But R&D work also needs to be better funded and supported by the EU. We need smart policies as well to provide the right incentives for investments in cleaner aircraft. We also need the manufacturers to be more ambitious in delivering more fuel-efficient aircraft in the longer term. Now, we heard it before, and I'll repeat it here again, that Europe's airspace inefficiencies impact not only the airlines and our customers, but also our planet. Implementing the single European sky would deliver at least a 10% reduction, and that's very conservative, in CO2 emissions, for example. So the current roadblocks that we're seeing are undermining the EU airline sustainability efforts and need to be urgently addressed. Carsten.
No, again, not Carsten. Everyone is waiting for Carsten. Shall we hand it over immediately? Yeah, just to further build on that, when it comes to investments made by airlines, we've just demonstrated in the introduction by Johan that a lot has been done already by the airlines in moving forward in making aviation a more green aviation, and the number of savings in a total of 20 million tons of CO2 emissions which have been done is really the way forward. We believe it should be the way forward. Rather than investing, in fact, we have been confronted with a growing tendency of taxation over taxation over taxation, and as such we do believe that green aviation taxes are not a silver bullet for the environment, but in fact are doing precisely the contrary. And to preserve connectivity for the EU and all the national governments, we believe that we should focus, as aviation business is a global business, we should focus on global solutions, and CORSIA is really the sole vehicle as the CO2 tackling issue for aviation. Secondly, aviation taxes will eventually negatively impact the European economies and jobs. First of all, they are not helping the environment. Secondly, it's just a negative impact on jobs. So whereas we do believe that we should invest in it rather than tax it, investing will bring us forward and help us to invest in things like biofuel, more environmental friendly routes. The examples given this morning here when it comes to air traffic delays and the enormous amounts of delays and in fact inefficient flying, implementation of SAS, single European skies, as Johan mentioned, will do 10%. That's much more than any taxation would ever realize or would ever help us. So we would call for the authorities to join hands and invest together in making aviation more sustainable rather than bluntly taxing it. And now, ladies and gentlemen, finally, Carsten.
Thanks, Peter. I feel the pressure, but it's only because we can't wait to talk about our other favorite topic, airport charges, which I'm not allowed to come to. The Commission has been evaluating the European Airport Charges Directive since 2016, but we're still waiting for the final report, unfortunately. And meanwhile, the fees that airlines pay to use these airports, which is basically the fees our passengers pay, continue to increase, and the need for reform, I think, is becoming more and more urgent. And in addition to the trend shown on the chart behind me, just a few facts maybe which I think are quite interesting. A study in 2017 done by the EU Commission found that the largest European airports raised charges by 23% in average from 2009 to 2016. 20 of Europe's largest airports even increased their charges by more than 40% in that period, and a handful even of airports managed to increase their charges by 100% in those 7 years. And some of these airports by now have EBITDA margins of up to 60 to 70% above the global average of already 47%, quite a high number in itself. And I think you would all agree there's very, very few industries who can compare to this and show this kind of margins. So you might wonder, how is this possible? And the answer is quite simple. Some airports just have significant market power and they just use it. The basically acting independently of the interest of airlines and of our passengers by basically charging excessively without being afraid of losing business. Why? Because they are local monopolies. And that drives up the cost of flying, which obviously is something we don't like. Especially since, by contrast, the intense competition, not only among the 5 us here, but all the European players in the airline industry, has lowered fares over the last years and increased connectivity and increased choices. But those gains coming from more competitiveness from us could be reversed if nothing is done to regulate those significant charges at airports. Therefore, a revised airport charge directive is needed, and recently Airlines for Europe and IATA have done a study to analyze which factors actually make airports behave more competitively. And they developed in this study a very simple yet very robust model how to do this, basically with 3 key tests being done with airports more than 5 million passengers each. And these tests will give regulators a very accurate indication of whether an airport has significant market power and needs to be regulated or not. And it's much less time consuming than what we have so far, where member states are doing very complex models like market power assessments, which basically have shown not to be as useful as we thought. So we actually showed that way of measuring significant market power to a group of regulators, the so-called Thessaloniki Forum, and they actually believe that there's very relevant questions, and they recognized that such criteria should be used to regulate airports. And I think going forward, such a model can be used, shall be used, in my view must be used by the Commission as a blueprint to finally reform the Airport Charges Directive. And I think in the end, we're not doing this for us, we're doing it for our passengers, and they are the ones who enjoy Europe as one of the most open travel environments in the world. So we wanted to keep it that way. And if you look at the state of Europe, what more can be done to keep Europe together than allowing people to connect with each other? And that's what the 5 of us here and the other industries players in this room or outside this room stand for. Thank you very much. Back to Thomas.
Before we open the floor to questions, I wanted to just call up a few individuals. As you know, in the fall, A4E, together with leaders from Eurocontrol and Kanzo, came together to address the situation, the lack of Europe's efficient airspace. We launched something called the Efficient Airspace Declaration, which is what you see here to my left. Our COOs have all signed this declaration. Kanzo has signed this declaration. Eurocontrol has signed this declaration. And today we are very pleased to announce that the European Travel Commission, Eduardo Santander, is here to help improve the experience on behalf of travelers coming to Europe who are also affected by our situation. He would also like to come forward and sign this declaration, as well as 2 additional COOs that are here with us from Volutea and also from TAP Air Portugal. So at this time, I'd like to call up Eduardo from the European Travel Commission to sign. Thank you. Eduardo, if you just stay here for a second, please. Eduardo, Elton de Souza. from TAP Air Portugal. And Isidre Porqueras, COO of Volutea. And with this effort, we hope to continue our good cooperation efforts both within the airline industry and also with all of the key stakeholders who are helping us to improve the situation on behalf of passengers. Thank you. At this time, we'll open up the floor to any questions you might have for the CEOs. We'll start here in the front, please. If you could say your name and your question.
Hi, hello. Mark Duursma, Netherlands. I have a question about air traffic control. For the last few years, Airlines for Europe have been complaining about inefficient air traffic control, and the situation doesn't seem to get any better. So 2 questions. What did Airlines for Europe really achieve in this aspect the last few years? And the second question, if this is a matter of efforts of the European Commission, what are your hopes for the next Commission, and what does Airlines for Europe do to get better results in the next term?
Maybe I'll take that. Since I did the slide, maybe I'll take that one. Firstly, what Airlines for Europe have come up with in the last 2 years is real solutions. You know, there hasn't been solutions proposed here. We've been wringing our hands for the last 15 or 20 years. Nothing can be done about air traffic control around Europe. It's a mess. We now have a list of practical solutions. We've been pushing on the European Commission. I think we also have, we're working closely with Eurocontrol, and they are reasonably simple and implementable. Separate the upper airspace so that you free overflights from disruptions during national strikes. Push a EU 261 liability back onto the ANSP providers, which would financially penalise them for their failure to deliver what we pay them to deliver. Shorten the period of time for training of ATCOs. 3 years is ridiculous. It's not a complicated job. It could be done in 6 months. And also harmonise the system so that they're all training on the same computers, which would see much more movement or mobility between the ATCOs. And lastly, compel or encourage the liberalisation of the ATM providers so they compete against each other, so that we as their customers, on behalf of our customers, can contract directly and produce efficiencies and hopefully lower costs and improve services. I think what A4E has put out there is a table of solutions. What we're missing at the moment is action from the European Commission, from the European authorities. Clearly we're not going to get any action for the remainder of this year until a new Commission is in place, but we are going to, and we agreed this morning in our steering committee, as we suffer, and we all expect we will suffer horrendous ATC problems through April, May and June, when the French start their recreational strikes. We're going to be much more out front and centre that this is, where are the problems? They're in Karlsruhe, they're in Marseille, and here are the solutions. Too often the airlines are inclined to just take the blame. It's an ATC delay. The airlines take the blame from our customers without actually being out there pointedly saying, here are the numbers. This is the first time in 3 years we've been to an A4E summit where we're able to say 90% of all flight delays in Europe in January were caused by ATC short staffing. There wasn't even a strike within air traffic control in January. This was just incompetent short staffing. So we've produced the solutions. Now what we're calling for is action.
Next question from Saeem.
Hi, Sam Saeed from Politico. I had a question on the aviation tax. There was a recent EU report that said that the entire basket of measures that have been applied so far have been unable to curb emissions, and they've been rising in absolute terms by 21% over the past 3 years. It doesn't seem as if Corsia will be the sole solution that's going to bring that down either. So what else are airlines going to do to curb emissions further than what's already been done, because it seems like new solutions are required?
Well, we have never said that Corsia is the solution. CORSIA is part of the solution, and there's a lot of other activities being taken. I think what is very disappointing for us, particularly in Europe, is where we've seen CO2 emissions increase much faster than they should because of inefficient air traffic control. And we need to be honest about this. You know, if we had an efficient ATC system in Europe, we would see a significant reduction in CO2 emissions, because we would be able to fly our modern aircraft as they have been designed to fly, which we can't do today because we're still operating under an archaic system of ATC systems around Europe. But, you know, it is part, CORSIA is part of the solution. It is part of a global solution, which is very important. But airlines are taking significant action. We're investing trillions of dollars in new aircraft, and we will continue to spend money on new aircraft, which are significantly more efficient from a fuel and carbon point of view. We are investing in alternative fuels. And we will see developments in relation to that in the coming years, and that will be part of the solution. We're improving the way we operate. We're taking measures to ensure that we are as efficient as we possibly can. We're encouraging manufacturers, as you've heard, to invest more in research and development, to come up with new alternative options for us. So there is a lot of coordinated activity going on. It's not solely dependent on the introduction of a global system, which we do support and we think is part of the solution. But airlines will continue to play their part. We will continue to invest trillions of dollars going forward in new, modern, efficient aircraft. And what we're calling on is for governments to do their part, and particularly in Europe, where, you know, delay in relation to the single European sky has caused inefficient airspace. We've highlighted today the inefficient management of ANSPs, particularly in Germany with Karlsruhe, and the impact of strikes in Marseille that not only causes inconvenience for our customers, it is increasing the amount of fuel we burn and the amount of CO2 we produce.
Next question from Itika de Jong.
Yes, Daily Telegraph, the Netherlands. In June, there will be a conference on a European aviation tax. The Dutch government aims to come to that. What is the response of A4E or some CEOs on this plan of the Dutch government?
Well, I think you know our views on that, and let me also sort of combine that with the previous question. And Willie has rightfully said, when we're speaking about taxation, the CORSIA is a part of a more global measures. There's next to that is wiping out the inefficiencies we spoke about, and secondly is the investments we're making in new technology and biofuel and all the things we are doing, in fact, to make a more greener aviation. When it comes to taxation, what we are very much against is a sort of piling up one taxation after the other. And what we see is that we have a global system being CORSIA, then we have a European ETS, that's 2, then 3, we have a number of airports who are making a differentiation in tariffs or even taxes on what is perceived as less efficient aircraft, and then fourthly there could be some national taxations on it. So if we have a global system, a European system, an airport system and a national system, at one point in time you end up paying more in your taxes than on the actual flying itself. So we would prefer a system whereby we invest really in technology and we invest in real steps forward in making aviation a more eco-friendly system, rather than just adding taxes for the overall system and the overall benefits of government finances. If it's up to us, no.
Okay, next question from Kurt Hoffman, Air Transport World.
Good morning, gentlemen. Good to see you again. A question regarding compensation to passengers. I remember last year all of you airlines paid a lot of money to passengers in terms of compensation. I think Lufthansa was 250 million. So we have to expect the same again, I guess, for 2019. Will this create a lot of pressure to airlines again in terms of your financial performance? And do you expect that maybe some of the airlines can disappear under this high pressure of paying compensation with more delays to expect this year?
I mean, it's that the whole situation about the compensation and the cost that this, comes on to the companies is also, something that is clearly unacceptable. I mean, we are facing the customer, and because we are paying out the compensation, the welfare cost, the customers also tend to think that we are the problem in this, whereas we are not able to recover some of that money from actually where the cost of this is actually happening. So, I mean, just in the EasyJet's case, we said publicly that, last year, the increase that we had in costs on this was 70 million. And the issue with this is that those money could have been there to continue to invest more in technology, to continue to keep, air travel affordable for everyone that is out there. So in the end, the customers are paying the cost of this because of the mismanagement of the system. So, we are, doing everything we can, and I think, that all airlines are doing what they can in order to minimize the cost of this. But on the other hand, we are first and foremost there to also look after our customers. But we're looking after our customers for something that we haven't caused from the beginning. So this is also why this is important. And the perception is an issue. The perception is an issue because, like I said, the majority of the customers thinks that because we are paying out something that we are at the fault. And that's not something that is fair and accurate.
And just to put it into context, and again, this is Eurocontrol data. If I look at the performance of Welling, which was disproportionately impacted by Marseille strikes and inefficiency, Eurocontrol statistics show that of all of the delays that Welling encountered, it was 20.6% of the delays were the responsibility of the airline. That's all. 20.6% of the delays that they encountered in 2018 were the responsibility of the airline. The rest of those delays were principally caused by ATC. And yet, we accept the responsibility to compensate our customers when we encounter these delays. But it demonstrates that the airline industry is efficient in operating in a congested environment in Europe. We're taking all the right measures. The inefficiency rests with air traffic control. And this cannot continue. And as Michael says, what we need to do is we need to put the penalty at the cause of the problem, and that's the only way the issues will get resolved.
Okay, next question.
Richard Schuurman, US-based website Air Insight. Mr. Elbers, you mentioned biofuels. Mr. Walsh, you mentioned CO2 reduction. Where come biofuels come in this discussion? Because last year there was a big chance to improve this in the European context. A failed result in the end is the perspective of many. Where do biofuels come in the discussion of CO2 reduction?
Well, in my case, we are investing in the development of a sustainable biofuel, waste to liquid. It's now being supported by the UK government, who recognise that the financial incentives that have been provided to the road transport industries to produce sustainable biofuels should also be made available to the airline industry, and the UK government is doing that. So you will see the development of a new biofuel plant in the UK with production coming on stream, we believe, in 2022. So as I said, it is part of the solution. We are taking measures in a number of different fronts. We're not depending on one single issue to address the issue. We believe that it requires a multitude of actions by everybody in the system to improve the CO2 performance of the industry.
Victoria.
If I may supplement to that, when it comes to biofuel, and I think you're perfectly aware of that, there's just a big shortage. There's a lack of availability. So from an airline perspective, we can, and actually we are working as much together and as close together with some of the providers when it comes to biofuel. We know that the actual stock at this point in time is really low. And when I would make a connection between the previous topics on taxation and biofuel, I think we would rather invest here in creating facilities for biofuel, or even work with some of the OEMs in developing new types of fuel, or less environmental impacting fuels, rather than linking it to purely taxation.
I mean, if you just took enough room in Germany for the biofuel of our airline alone, you would need a third of Germany to be covered. I think the future is rather power to fuel, because with all the electric the solar power and the future wind-driven energy, there will be surplus of energy, and there's no better way really to store that but to store it as fuel. And that we just started that in Hamburg. I think it's a small, as Peter said, volume at this point, but I think that's the thing we have to look into the future. How can we convert surplus power wherever in the world into fuel, have it transported to where it's needed? I think there's a huge potential there, much more than in biofuels, and that I think is the way to go.
Good morning, Victoria with Air Transport World. 3 questions, if I may. The first one is on EU 261. We've been waiting for a while on a review of that regulation. It's been stuck. Is there any signs of that getting unstuck? The second question is on ETS. And is there any news on the impact of Brexit and the UK's inclusion in EU ETS with it exiting the European Union? And the final question is, what's your outlook in terms of the airline landscape in Europe? Do you think that we are going to see more failures, or do you think that the failures that we've seen recently, that's pretty much it? Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria, for the question. EU 261 question I will take. Yes, that's one of the dossiers that was stuck because of the notorious Gibraltar case. Well, we would in a way hope that if and when and if we do get a Brexit, that dossier can be pushed forward. The good news is that this and other dossiers then will be freed up. There will be no longer an excuse, I would think, for the Council not to deal with these. Basically the Commission has told us that EU261 would be a priority of those dossiers that could be then freed up for new action, new dynamism. On EU ETS and I think Brexit, my understanding is that there will be an agreement for the UK government to continue to commit to EU ETS, to the system, so that's good news. Last but not least, a very good question is what will be... Carsten wants to comment as well on which bit? On the airlines. On the airlines, I think it's probably a good question for you to answer, what the prospects are, the future of the airlines landscape.
Well, I'm convinced there will be enough airlines also in the future to fund Airlines for Europe. That's important for you, Thomas. And I'm probably afraid to tell you, you need to face the 5 of us also in the future, because I think there is a healthy airline industry in Europe. But is there too many airlines, and are we going to see more failures? Clearly, yes. Is it going to be the same speed as the last month, which even surprised me, to be honest, because we are at fairly low fuel cost and at fairly good demands. And in such a period, to lose as many airlines as we've seen the last month shows that there's an unhealthy element in this industry. And by the way, 261 drove that. I think it accelerated the failure of airlines, especially for small airlines, that can be a burden. If you look at the US, there's a much higher consolidation there, a much more healthy relationship between supply and demand. I'm not saying we will copy the US model. I think there will be more national players in Europe because of the nature of this continent, which makes it so unique. But I think the trend of having number of airlines reduced and more healthy airlines having a higher market share, we're quite convinced will continue.
We have time for 2 more questions over to the left. The lady in the back with the blonde hair.
Thank you. Birgit Voigt von NZZ am Sonntag, Switzerland. I have a question. Mr. Spohr suggested last year, I think, that in general the entire sector eases a little bit or limits voluntarily the growth in order to ease pressure on air traffic control. I was wondering what your competitors on the panel are saying to that suggestion. Thank you.
You're my favorite competitor.
Sorry, could you, I'm not exactly clear if I understand your question.
Mr. Spohr suggested last year that the entire industry lowers its growth rate voluntarily a little bit in order to ease the pressure on the ATC problem. And I was wondering what you were saying to that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think to some extent the growth is under pressure already by sort of not only air traffic control delays, but even the fact that an increasing number of airports are simply not having the number of slots available anymore. Schiphol is one of them, where the ceiling of number of slots has been reached, and there will be virtually no growth in 2019 and 2020. So that's not a matter of voluntarily reducing growth, but a reality of airports getting full, so that will happen. From a customer perspective, if the demand is there and people want to fly, I think for us collectively as an industry, we should be able to facilitate that growth, and we should not have a sort of limit set on what a number of growth would be. Could it be 2% or 3 or 4 or 5? I think it's again, the demand is there. We should, as an industry, collectively facilitate such demand. That should be the general rule. Then with that, we should be able to deliver it, in fact, and the air traffic control delays have demonstrated that the industry cannot live up to that at this point in time, and that's where the measures have been presented, as Michael just did.
Last question from
Sorry, can I just add to that? Because I do think it's an important thing that, you know, when you're looking at a presentation like this and when you dive into the materials of the inefficiency in the airspace, there are, to what Michael said, there are some very, very practical, simple solutions to this. There's a lot of things in life that has a lot of complexity to it. This actually doesn't in terms of the situation. And that's why it's so important to focus on them to make sure that it goes from now being a political willingness to perhaps do something to actually get some action on these things. And that's where we want to focus on.
Questions? The gentleman in the back has been waiting. There.
Morning, Simon Calder from The Independent in London. JetBlue looks set to announce transatlantic services next month. Is that a threat to airlines of Europe, or is it an opportunity, for example, for Ryanair or for EasyJet?
Well, I don't believe it is a threat. You know, the transatlantic environment is very competitive. JetBlue have been talking about doing this for several years, so I don't think it comes as any surprise if they do actually finally announce something, having said they were going to announce something for, I think, at least the last 3 years. So, you know, I don't see it as it's a welcome development, I'm sure, but it's not going to change the landscape on the transatlantic.
Last question from the gentleman right, who's been waiting there. Yeah.
Hi there, Alistair Smout from Reuters. Last year, a few of you voiced a bit of concern about Brexit, and from IAG's annual report, it seems like that concern's not gone away. With less than a month until Britain's due to leave the EU, how concerned are you? You seem to be quite phlegmatic on the whole. And would a short delay without any kind of purpose scupper contingency plans that you have put in place, or would you welcome it even if the purpose was unclear? Thanks.
I don't think it's concern that we expressed, it's frustration that we expressed, that we still don't know, with only a few weeks to go to the 29th of March when the UK will leave. And, you know, we do really need the politicians to resolve this and give some form of visibility. You know, we're not allowing it to distract us from what it is we have to do, and we'll just get on and we manage these uncertainties. Probably the airline industry manages them better than any other industry, because we've tended to have a lot more uncertainties that we've had to address historically. So I think it is, though, you know, I think the word I used was shocking, that we don't have visibility in terms of what will happen on the 29th of March. But as you can see, we've just continued to work and develop our plans and deal with whatever comes our way, and I'm very confident that not only the IAG airlines but all airlines in Europe will be able to manage the situation whatever way it develops.
Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.